today. Let me know if you can hear and see me. You know how we start every single stream here. I am ready to do another Intrepid Museum virtual event this afternoon, evening, night, morning, wherever you are, as it turns out the way time zones work. But let's get started. Let me know that you can hear and see me right now. I'm your host here, Das. If you're on the Twitch channel, you probably know me because we've done quite a few of these actually, all the way up to October now. But we are just about ready to get started. As always, massive thanks to Intrepid Museum. We've done so many of these shows. They are always a good time. Again, I look forward to sharing it with y'all today, and we'll have a good time. I am reading Twitch chat as well, and I welcome feedback too. So if I get anything through there, we can certainly turn that up a bit. There we go. Like that. There we go. And make sure we're ready to go. Barry, how's it going? I saw Eon Raptor coming through there as well. Again, y'all, you keep showing up, and I really appreciate you stopping in so we can share this stuff. It's not your first rodeo. You've been around here for a while, so you know what the Intrepid Museum virtual events are. Long ago, it feels like long ago. How many years ago was it? Back in March, I guess. When we had to go through shutting down the museums and that sort of stuff, you couldn't go in because of everything that's going on in the world, and everything got sort of turned on its head. We said, what can we do to continue sharing cool, inspirational, educational, scientific, STEM content with people while we're all stuck at home? And that's how we came up with this idea to do the virtual events, the Virtual Astronomy Lives, we call them, because it was modeled after the original events, the astronomy events, the astronomy night events that the Intrepid Museum did actually at. You'd actually go to the event, walk into the museum, go up to the shuttle pavilion, they'd have a speaker on the stage and that sort of stuff. So we sort of transitioned it over here to this virtual event so that people all over the world could join us in sharing whatever we're talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about food in space. So if you are hungry or not hungry, you're probably going to be hungry by the time we get into this discussion. I've got all sorts of pictures of food. You can see the pictures of space food. I think this is a Skylab kit I put up on the screen here. Microgreens experiment in the background as well. It's all very relevant. But if you're hungry or you think you may soon be hungry, this may be a time that you want to get up and grab yourself a snack or something to eat, because if you watch this show, you may end up hungry at the end. Snacks at the ready. That's what I like to see there. That's what I like to see there. Olaf from Texas, Flya Beach. How are you doing? Excellent, excellent. But I think we are just about ready to get going. Like I said, the topic's going to be food in space today. We'll have our fantastic moderator, Summer Ash, joining us in just a bit here. Also, Mike Massimino with the museum will be joining us. Astronaut, flown in space more than one time. You've seen him on the show before. Then we have a special guest from NASA Johnson, actually. Food Systems Manager from NASA Johnson will be joining us as well. That comes up in about 25 minutes. We have like a little pre-show thing. You know when you go to an event and then there's like music playing in the background and everybody's sort of milling around before you sit down, and then the stage present, somebody comes up there and taps the mic, right? Like this is you're all sort of filing into the stream. And we try to come up with something cool and interesting to do in the meantime. And we have a cool pre-show presentation for you coming up shortly as well. But let me roll through rules, regulations, that sort of stuff really quickly. So I know you've probably seen these events before, but this is a live event. I'm here like right now. Like, when is now going to be? It's now. Like, this is me here, unless you're watching a video, then it gets really confusing. But if you're joining us today on October 15th at 5:05 Eastern Daylight Time is now, whatever. So it is live, and we want them to be interactive. So if you have questions for us, you're talking about what we're talking about, put it in chat of it right now. There you go, Susanna. Right now is right now. See, I just read that right when it appeared on the screen. But when will then be now? Thank you for getting the reference. It is live, and if you have questions, you want to talk about it, I encourage you to participate in chat. If you're on the website, if you're on KerbalSpaceAcademy.com/intrepid, you see that big button where it says, participate in chat. If you want to chat, you want to ask questions, you do have to pop on over to the Twitch side. Two different ways to watch it. You can watch it with no chat and just get the video, just the host, the presenters, and all that sort of stuff. Or you can pop over to chat and you can participate, you can ask questions. If you ask questions, right? I actually have some software here, courtesy of one of my fantastic mods and programmer extraordinaires, Mutter, who wrote some software for me that actually pulls your questions out of chat and keeps track of them. So over the course of the event, I will be gathering your questions. If you see something on the screen and you're like, whoa, what about this? Like, what is that taste like, or whatever, because it's food. Put your question in chat. There will be a Q&A period at the end of the show, and all those questions will get saved up. I'll go through the queue. I'll pull some cool questions that came through over the course of the show, and at the end of the show, we have 30 minutes at the end of the show to go through all your questions. So don't feel like I'm ignoring you if I don't immediately go to your question and say, oh, that's a great question right now. They are going into a queue. There's some instructions on how to do it right there during Virtual Astronomy Live. We welcome all questions that are relevant to the show's topic. Those are instructions on how you can actually get your question into chat. Make sure you use the word question in there somewhere so the software can pick it up and put it in the queue. But be patient. I'm not ignoring you. We're going to have the first part here where we have our pre-show with Elysia from the museum. Then we'll have the moderated discussion with Summer Ash, Mike Massimino, and our guest from NASA, Johnson, talking about food and space. And then the last part of the show will be the live Q&A where we can pick up questions and that sort of thing. So I appreciate everybody joining us. And please understanding the rules, the live nature, that sort of stuff. Keep your questions relevant to the topic. Like if you ask a completely out left field question, like, did you see aliens or something, it's not going to go into the question queue. All right? It's not going to go into it's just going to go away. So keep your questions relevant to the topic. Also remember, we're a family-friendly stream here, so keep it something that all ages can enjoy. We want everyone to be able to share with these experiences. Let's hear from the astronauts, hear from the people that are actually designing and preparing food that gets sent up to space for the astronauts to eat. So without further ado, let's get a little bit on with the pre-show here. With me today, you've seen her on the show before, I have Elysia Segal. How you doing, Elysia? And, let's see here. We may have an audio check. How about now, Elysia? We got you now?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me back.
Excellent. It's good to have you again. It's not the first virtual event you've been on here with us, right?
Right. Yes, two times prior to this.
There you go. We did the folding one where we folded the F-14 was one of them, right?
I don't know if I have one in front of me. Yeah, the origami F-14,
yep.
And last time we talked about some space training simulations. Yes.
Good deal. So Elysia is the lead teaching artist and educator at Intrepid Museum. Because I didn't have room for all that, so I just put Intrepid next to her name. But that fits, right? But what are you going to be talking with us today here? We have a little bit of a presentation and stuff, don't we?
Oh, we have so much in store for you today. All right. So yes, as you mentioned previously, today's Astronomy Live is all about food. And hopefully by the end of this, you will be starving. We're going to make you so hungry because we're going to be talking about some amazing food. So I'm going to actually talk a little bit about the precursor food to what they currently have. During the show, we're going to hear a little bit about what they ate on the space shuttle and currently now what they're eating up in space. But what was it like prior to that during the Mercury through Apollo missions, right? So let's think even before that. Throughout history, explorers have always had to deal with the availability of food or lack thereof while they're on these really long expeditions. So like maybe they're on a boat or they're on a camel in the desert or they're hiking through the wilderness or in space, right?
Yep.
So the idea of getting nutrition so that you don't develop, I don't know, like scurvy if you're on a boat, right?
Scurvy,
or
I like it.
Yeah, right. Or something else so that you have this food over a long period of time because those journeys can last a while. And also something that didn't weigh too much to burden you down on your trip. These have always been an issue people have been thinking about.
Right.
Early on, we discovered that, food would actually be edible for longer periods of time if they were dried. Often people would cut up things like meat or fish or fruit into thin strips, and then they dry them out in the sun. We still eat things like that, like dried fruits or beef jerky, stuff like that.
Yep.
Starting at and later on, we developed things like curing, rubbing salt on it to preserve it, freezing it to make it last longer, canning, which maybe many of you at home are doing right now in quarantine. But not all of those storage solutions work well for spaceflight.
Right.
So they've got limitations on weight and volume, and they have to think about packaging in a microgravity environment, and for a number of years also the lack of refrigeration up there.
Right.
And so that's where the genius of people at NASA came in, and you are going to get to hear from one of them today a little bit later as well. So early on in the space program, even before we sent anyone into space for the first time, there was also a lot of concerns about people's ability to swallow in microgravity, even being able to digest
to actually eat it.
Food.
Like, yeah, like what would happen in space?
Can you swallow when there's, a teeny tiny little bit of gravity? Who knows? Where's it going to go, right?
Yep.
So they weren't sure about any of this stuff. And that's why the Mercury missions were so important to start testing it out. And then it got a little bit more complicated as they went. Baby steps. So they were also concerned, though, with how to prepare it, too. Things like temperature and air pressure, even like vibrations inside of the capsule while they were up there in space and going up.
Yep.
And of course, like I said, they had to consider the additional weight factors of all of this food on board for long-term missions.
Yeah, because you get into it and you're like, oh, why don't they just stuff the capsule full of canned goods? Well, think of canned goods. If you're coming home from the grocery store and you have a sack, does anybody like me? You have to carry them all in one go. You can't like make multiple trips. And you have a sack that's filled with canned goods. Is that light or heavy? It's super heavy. So you can't just stuff your capsule filled with canned goods and have them up there with a can opener, right? You have to come up with different solutions.
Packaging is so important to it too.
Yeah.
And again, making it last a long period of time. So we've got some really awesome photos. Das, if you wouldn't mind pulling them up for me. And I'm going to kind of walk you through a little bit of our history of space food.
All right.
Starting with Mercury.
So
awesome.
You go.
Now, in the earliest days of the space program during Project Mercury, our flights really only lasted for a few minutes, up to about a day. So they didn't really need too much food for that. This photo here is of John Glenn having breakfast on the morning of his first historic Mercury flight, where he became the first American to orbit the Earth. And this has really kind of become a tradition for astronauts now. They have that one big meal on Earth before their mission. And because of that, they don't need to eat a whole lot too for the shorter flights. And because then those early astronauts would also do a lot of testing on the flights, things like chewing and drinking and swallowing solid and liquid foods in microgravity. So you can see here the earliest food systems on Mercury were similar to military survival rations, or what hikers might take on a long trip. They had to provide a lot of nutrition in a very small container. Now, John Glenn was America's first man to eat in space. And in this picture, you can actually see a tube. It kind of looks like a toothpaste tube with a straw coming out of it, floating right next to him on the left. And on that mission, he, from that tube, ate applesauce in that tube. And so on the left there is actually the actual container he ate that applesauce out of. And then also to the right of it is some pureed beef and vegetables. Now, he found it fairly easy to consume. He didn't have any problem swallowing it or anything, but he did complain he thought the menu was a little limited. But as we go through this, I want you to pay attention in particular to the beef and vegetables, because this is a popular meal and you're going to get to see how it progressed. Now, these early Mercury astronauts found themselves eating these thick pureed liquids that they would squeeze into their mouths from these toothpaste-like aluminum tubes like these here. On the left, there's bananas, and on the right is clam chowder. Maybe not together. But then also you'd have dehydrated and compressed bite-sized cubes of food. So on the right of this picture, we've got some cookies, we've got some bread substitute bites. They kind of look like croutons there, chocolate wafers, and some apricot bites. And then the rest of the photo has these dehydrated powders that could be reconstituted with water. Now on the top row, there's chicken, there's cocoa, grape nuts in dehydrated milk, and then on the bottom, there's banana pudding, beef gravy, or beef and gravy, and some juice as well. So adding that water to it will kind of make it, thicker. It'll all get absorbed into it, and then a little bit easier to eat. Here's another photo of some dehydrated Mercury foods. We've got strawberries on the top left, pears on the top right, mushroom soup on the bottom, and then wait for it, beef and vegetables. So now we have graduated from the pureed goo in a tube to a freeze-dried log. Yum. Now this photo shows the mechanism for connecting a water dispenser to the food containers that I just showed you. Each portion of food was individually packaged in flexible, transparent plastic pouch, kind of like something you might get at Trader Joe's actually. And it also had a water injection port. So the water was inserted into the package from a pouch that they had brought on board additionally, and then it was kneaded up to get all the water mixed in and squeezed out to eat through a little tube at the top, kind of like Go-Gurt. But overall, the food wasn't really appetizing, and they kept running into problems when they tried to rehydrate the powders. But fortunately, the Mercury missions, like I said, weren't that long anyway, so food was not quite as essential for survival. But then we get to Gemini. Now, the Gemini mission, some were up to 2 weeks at a time. So this was when some big advancements had to come in with space food. And NASA teamed up with the Whirlpool Corporation, the ones who make refrigerators and things, and the U.S. Army Laboratory. And then the first thing to go was those aluminum squeeze tubes. First of all, they were gross, but also, like we were saying, those metal tubes actually weighed a lot, and often more than the food inside them. Now, NASA knew that foods floating around in a microgravity environment could damage equipment or worse, even get inhaled. So they actually worked with the Pillsbury company, like the Doughboy, to develop an edible gelatin layer that went over it to reduce crumbling of any of the food cubes that they sent them up with. And then these foods were also vacuum sealed into plastic pouches for storage. And what you've been seeing here, we've got fruitcake, we've got some brownies, we've got apricot cereal on the left, and then some strawberry cubes on the right here too. But again, covering dehydrated cubes with gelatin. Oh, it does not sound very appetizing, does it? And some of the astronauts didn't think so either. So there is an infamous story that we like to tell about the Gemini 3 mission in 1965, which was actually one of the missions that the Intrepid picked up. So on board Gemini 3, there were 2 astronauts, Gus Grissom and John Young, who you can see here. And one of the experiments that they were tasked on their 5-hour mission was to sample 2 meal packages. And this is actually one of them. It had dehydrated beef pot roast, orange juice, toasted bread cubes, and bacon and egg bites, and a wet wipe. And obviously they weren't supposed to eat the wet wipe. But 2 days before the launch, fellow astronaut and practical joker Wally Schirra stopped by Wolfie's Restaurant and Sandwich Shop in Cocoa Beach near Cape Kennedy. He picked up a corned beef sandwich and he gave it to John Young as a joke. Well, John kept the sandwich. In fact, he smuggled it up into space with him by hiding it in his spacesuit. And once they got into orbit, he pulled out the corned beef sandwich and he took a bite. And he even offered it to his friend Gus right there too. Gus wasn't even supposed to eat anything on that flight at all. But there they were. They ate the first corned beef sandwich in space. But here is the problem, right? If you eat a sandwich here on Earth and there's crumbs, well, there's gravity, so the crumbs will just go down, right? But in space, float everywhere. And that is exactly what happened. Now, that actually was very dangerous because, like I said, those crumbs could have gotten lodged into their equipment, or worse, they could have inhaled them. So NASA was not thrilled about this because they quickly realized, well, yeah, it was a bad idea. They put it away, but they had heard every word of this conversation back home, and they got in a lot of trouble when they returned. Now, they didn't lose their jobs, but they did have to publicly apologize to Congress, who was furious with them because they were wasting their time and money and they weren't eating the experimental food that they had sent them up with in the first place. But they actually also helped NASA in an unexpected way because they began to think a little bit more about these issues of crumbs and other foods that maybe they shouldn't consider taking into space for that reason. And so now, actually, if an astronaut wants to eat a sandwich up in space, they can't use bread. They have to use tortillas instead. Now, you are probably wondering, what are we looking at here, right? Well, this is a replica of that infamous corned beef sandwich that has been memorialized in resin at the Gus Grissom Memorial Museum in Indiana. Congress may not have thought that it was funny, but they certainly did. And then almost 2 decades later, John Young actually became the first commander of the space shuttle. And at that point, food had progressed quite a bit. So you know what he ate for lunch in space? Corned beef. Properly irradiated and sealed, of course. But back to Gemini. Now, starting with these missions, the water was actually produced on board as a byproduct of fuel cell operation, and it could be injected with this little hose. So the just add water, like dehydrated foods, gave them a lot more options and really cut down on the weight of having to bring extra water with them. So in the next picture that you're going to see here, this is what it would look like at mealtime. So you've got strawberry cubes that you could just rip open and then pop in your mouth. And then the beef now here is reconstituted with that bag with water in there. And then some other food that was flown on later Gemini missions were cinnamon toasted bread cubes, shrimp cocktail was very popular, chocolate cubes, cream of chicken soup, and turkey and gravy. And as time went on, they made a number of additional changes, though, too, mainly because they realized that the food wasn't really as nutritionally balanced as they'd wanted, and the food preparation took a lot of time and effort. And then also sometimes the meals just didn't taste great because the water they were using from the fuel cells had dissolved gases in it, so not the cleanest water to be eating. And sometimes things just didn't really reconstitute properly, too. So by the time of Apollo, which you can see some stuff here, the quality and variety of food increased even further. So the first manned Apollo mission, Apollo 7, actually had 96 food items available. And Apollo astronauts were also the first to have hot water, cleaner this time, which made rehydrating the foods a lot easier and also really improved the taste because it wasn't just room temperature all the time. Some of the earlier packages that were in the food there too, they had those plastic tube pouches like before, but then eventually a number of them were changed to this new spoon bowl package. This one is chicken and rice. It flew on Apollo 11. And as you can see, it's a plastic container that could be rehydrated through a valve on one side and then opened up with a zip top on top. And then the contents could be eaten out with a spoon, like a bowl. Same idea here. This one is labeled as spiced fruit cereal, and it's also got dehydrated milk powder in it. So if I had to guess, it's basically Apple Jacks and milk for breakfast there. Sounds pretty tasty. And then, of course, we can see our Apollo progression of none other than beef with vegetables. So still a dehydrated log at first, but now once they add water, you can eat it with a spoon instead of slurping it out through a straw. Also, incidentally, in case you were wondering, the first NASA meal eaten on the moon consisted of bacon bars, peaches, sugar cookie cubes, coffee, and a pineapple grapefruit drink. Delicious. Some of the other foods, though, that were consumed on Apollo were things like cheese crackers, sausage patties, scrambled eggs, peanut cubes, tuna salad, spaghetti and meat sauce, beef pot roast, and believe it or not, even hot dogs in thermostabilized packages. Now, I know we have covered a ton of food so far, but really, I know you all must be thinking, well, space food, where's this stuff, right? The astronaut ice cream. Well, this wacko idea of food in space has become such a novelty that this is all that people think about because it is so popular in gift shops and it's just so chalky and weird to eat and it like dissolves on your tongue. But actually, everyone, I have a terrible, terrible secret to tell you. Astronaut ice cream and, like ice cream bars like this, right? They actually never went into space. I mean, honestly, like, look at this stuff. Just how, do you see how crumbly it all is? Can you see that? That is a terrible idea. Messy, crumbly things like this, a disaster in microgravity, as we learned from John Young and his corned beef sandwich. Now, freeze-dried ice cream cubes were originally developed for early Apollo missions by Whirlpool, but they never made it on board. And there was one press release about Apollo 7 that listed vanilla ice cream as a dessert on board the ship. But since then, Walt Cunningham, who's the sole surviving astronaut from that mission, he has confirmed numerous times that ice cream was never on the menu for him. But in 2006, a freezer was flown aboard the space shuttle to store some research samples, so they figured, what the heck, we've got a freezer anyway, let's send them up with the real thing. So they had those little individually portioned ice cream cups in space, too. Now, they may not have had ice cream on board, but one thing they definitely had a lot of throughout history was pudding. So eventually, they got it down so that they could send up normally hydrated pudding packs. But we thought it would be fun to bring back the spirit of the early space program stuff for you today. So right now at home, you can actually make your own vintage NASA-style pudding with just a few items. So all you need for it is some instant pudding mix. Any flavor will do. This one is French vanilla that I had lying around. You also need some dehydrated milk powder, so you can get this stuff online or in camping stores. I think I got this on Amazon. You also need some water, hopefully clean. Hopefully there's no gases in it. And also just a zip top bag. So it's really, really simple. And we've actually scaled it down to a single size serving portion for you. So all you have to do is take 3 tablespoons of your dry instant pudding mix. Put that into your bag there. All right. Then you take 4.5 tablespoons of your dried milk powder. Put that into the bag as well. All right, and now just kind of mix it up a little bit. So you can imagine right now, because we're sealed obviously, this is what it would look like if you were going up into space. You just have this powder, and it doesn't look that appetizing right now, but that's because we haven't added water yet. So this is how it would look going into space, and now the fun part. Imagine you're up in space, you're floating around. You've got your little water gun there too. You're gonna take 6 tablespoons of water. You're gonna pour that into the bag. Then try to get as much air out as you can, and you're gonna seal up the top. Seal it up really good so nothing comes out, obviously. Get all that air out. Alrighty. And then, once it's closed, all you gotta do is just start squishing it up. So just seal it up good, squeeze it, mash it up, and it takes about a minute or two. But eventually, it gets all mixed up together. I mean, really, if you think about it, all you're doing is adding water to the milk powder to make milk. And then you added the milk to the instant pudding, which is all it takes, really. So you kind of mash it up for a little bit. It takes about a minute or two. But eventually, once it's all mixed up and put together like that, you are going to have, I cheated, I had one earlier, you are going to have some pudding in a single serve little zip pouch here. And all you got to do, grab a spoon, just like the astronauts, and voila. You've got your own little mini spoon bowl of space pudding, just like the Apollo astronauts. There you go.
Elysia, I would be remiss. I would be remiss if I didn't ask. Did you bring enough for everyone?
I mean, I don't know. I need
just sort of put it up to the camera and just see if you can share it with the.
Yeah. Here you go, guys.
Delicious. I like that you actually. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say. I mean, it doesn't. You're obviously eating pudding out of a bag. Doesn't really look super appetizing, but that's what the astronauts do. They eat stuff out of little bags.
Less dishes to clean up, too. I love that you did the actual cooking show thing where it's like, 1, 2, skip a few. Already had this done over here. Like.
Well, so see, I added it, and it is starting to thicken up. It takes about a minute or two, but for the sake of time, I thought I'd have it ready to go.
It makes perfect sense. It's always, you see the cooking shows, and then it's like, wait, when did they do that? I didn't see them. They just bring the ingredients off the side. And they have all those cute little bowls, like the individual servers. But that is fantastic. I especially like it. It's one of my very favorite stories. I know when we did the pre-show, I was like, oh, we're doing food in space. You got to talk about the sandwich? Yeah, the sandwich. Like, you knew exactly, all I have to do is say the sandwich, and you knew exactly what I was talking about.
Exactly. And we are so lucky at the Intrepid that was the capsule, or one of the capsules that we picked up too, so we get to tell that story every time. It's great.
I don't know, the immortalizing the replica sandwich in a block of resin. Chad, is that like a step too far, though?
So that is, like I mentioned, that's at the Gus Grissom Memorial Museum in Indiana. I think that's they actually have the capsule, I believe, the Gemini 3 capsule that people picked up. So I think that was just a way to kind of, bring that story to life a little bit and to get people's attention, right? Why is there a sandwich on display next to a Gemini capsule, right? But it's certainly a story that people love to hear, and it really makes them think, wow, these astronauts are just like us. They really are. Everyone's a practical joker.
Yep. It's an interesting story also because of the science and the planning that goes behind it, because you're like, oh, big deal, he took a sandwich to space, but the crumbs are such a thing. It almost ties into the whole space pencil thing. Everybody knows the story about, oh, NASA spent money on a pen. Not actually true. The company privately funded it, and then Russia just used the pencil. Well, why don't we use pencils? Because crumbs could fly. You don't want crumbs, little graphite bits or pencil leads or anything like that getting in your electronics, getting in your eyes. It's the same thing with breadcrumbs. Who would have thought that the pencil was the same as a breadcrumb? But
absolutely, and nothing messes with re-entry like hacking on a piece of rye bread does.
Excellent. Elysia, thank you so much for the time today. Again, we always do little pre-shows. This is our sort of deal where we have something cool, interesting, sometimes interactive. Like how many of you got up to go and make some pudding? Anybody? Nobody had pudding ready. But something that's interactive as we get the show. It's sort of the event that's going on while everybody's sort of filing into the live stream. Elysia, lead teaching artist and educator for the museum. Thank you so much for talking to us about, can I say old school space food?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it was. Because then after that, you got a little bit more advanced, and that's what everyone's going to be talking about with you tonight.
Excellent. So we will see you next time on the show, and I'm going to see if I can get our next set of guests on.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful Astronomy Live, everyone.
All right. Thank you again.